All right, hello, folks. Welcome back to our pairing stream with James Shore here.
Hi everyone. Glad to be back. It was I was happy to have last week off because I needed it to work on the course, which is tomorrow. I've been working my butt off for this thing. It's basically been 5 weeks of solid work and overtime getting this all together, but it's in really good shape now. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens when it hits the real world.
Yeah, it'll never run as expected, but I'm sure it'll be great. Hey, Xproof.
Yeah. I was looking through, so it's very exercise heavy, and the way I do it is like with these adventure hint books where there's a very small, here's the exercise you're going to do, and then there's like 5 pages of hints that you can expand into. Like each one is like, you need to try this. Well, here's how you can try this. Well, here's the source code for trying this. And I was calculating it out. It's something like 200 to 300 pages of these hints and notes.
Wow.
And that's why I've been so busy over the last
That's
5
a
weeks.
lot. Wow.
Yeah. And the thing is people aren't expected to do every exercise. I deliberately have more than they can possibly do.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing how it works out.
Yeah.
Probably people won't even look at the hints. They'll just be like, yeah, I know how to do this.
Yeah.
Thanks, proof.
Builder. So Xproof asked you basically about builder, constructors. So I'm actually writing an article as a sort of a follow-on to an article I wrote recently around IO free versus non-IO, which is sort of my terminology to completely sidestep the debate about what is a unit. I am so tired of that debate, and I feel like I don't really care. I don't care. Yeah. Like, is it isolated or sociable? Solitary or sociable? Okay, we can talk about that. But the other stuff I don't care about. But something that
really is it fast or not?
Yeah, that's right. That's really what it's about. Is like, is it fast enough? Is it deterministic? Is it fast enough so that I can run it hundreds of times an hour if I had to? And that's really what I wrote about in the articles. Like, I mean, it's kind of funny. It's like I just, every single class I would teach is like, okay, let me define how I use unit and how I use integration. I'm like,
yeah.
So, but the follow-on was sort of, I've been really looking a lot, especially because one of the ensembles we've been sort of, I think last stream we talked about like the 75 tests that were failing because we changed a protocol of requirement, a prerequisite for an object, and it caused a whole bunch of things. So we spent the time refactoring, which was really good. And I was really thinking about relating to Xproof's question about builders, like, and I always had this. I don't know if it's a hierarchy, but sort of it's a process of, first thing you do is you create a method, right? So maybe you have some repetition in the test. Okay, now it's time to refactor into a method that the whole test class can use. Then it's like, okay, now I've got a bunch of these, and actually they're used across a few separate test classes. Let me centralize that into a factory. And then, wow, now I've got a whole bunch of factory methods, and some of them are just overloaded or alternatives to others. How do we do that? And that's where you start getting into the builder. And so for me, it's very much that. It's like, it's that process of what repetition, what duplication do I see that pushes me to say, okay, now I need something a little bit more flexible, and sort of this, it's a trade-off, because the builder, it's not a lot more work, but it's a little bit more work. And so that's kind of what I've been thinking about, and sort of writing that, like, okay, going from factory now to builder, what's that process look like?
It's been said, and I think there's some truth to this. And by the way, hi Grumpy, glad to see you.
Hey, Grumpy.
It's been said that the types of patterns you see in the Gang of Four book, the original design patterns book, are actually not design patterns like you see with Ward Cunningham's episodes pattern language, or his I always forget. It's my very favorite pattern language, though. Not his episodes pattern language.
The whole value or checks.
It's called checks. It has whole value as one of the patterns. Or even my Nullables, my testing without blocks pattern language. These are more like, how do we solve types of problems? Whereas the Gang of Four patterns, including builder, those are really, some people say that these are patterns for working around flaws in the language.
Right.
And I think there's some truth to that, because what I found working in C# to a lesser degree and JavaScript to a greater degree is that languages that have default parameters, named parameters that you can provide defaults to, they don't need the builder pattern, because then you can just create a single factory method that does everything for you.
Right.
So now that I've gotten used to that, I used to do almost all my work in Java, but I moved away from that and did a lot in C# and JavaScript. And now that I'm coming back to Java working with you, I'm really feeling the pain of that. Like, because I feel like XProof is talking about, it takes up a lot of space, and that space is mental energy. So, in our fixtures, we've been using this options pattern, which I don't know if that's an official pattern, but that's what I'm calling it, where we create a record. Where do you have that?
Yeah, I'm going to bring that up
in there somewhere.
Let me just switch views here.
It's fixture, actually. It should be in VueController.
Actually, it's right here.
Yeah. So we have these fixtures that take. I guess we haven't done it here, but elsewhere we've created options, an option object that we pass in with public variables, and maybe. Yeah, I guess here fixture is the return value.
Yeah. So here fixture was working around the problem of
not having
multiple return values. Yeah. So basically wrap it up in a record, and then we access it directly through, something like this, which works out really nice. I really like that. Then there's where is it? Here we go. So we've got our options here. So our saved game options, and then we can just pull those out. And people get so into the habit, and especially in Java, of putting getters and setters around everything. And it's like, in this case, we don't care. This is like a temporary thing. This save game options is totally about just holding on to information for use by the rest of the test. So who cares? Just make them accessible as just. It's basically, a named map that, as you said, it's like in JavaScript, it would just be, named stuff. Here in Java, okay, we have to define variables, and so it's a little bit more verbose.
Yeah. The I wonder, when we first started doing this, you didn't have the version of Java that supported records, and I wonder if we were to redo some of these options objects, if they would be less verbose with the record. I'm not sure if that's true, because we're doing the return this. After everyone.
Because the problem with record is it's meant to be immutable, right? And you actually don't have direct access to the instance variables. So it actually is not as good a fit, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think the options object makes sense for save game, where we're not actually building something. But the builder pattern would make sense kind of in our fixtures, actually, if we get to the point of needing to provide options to the fixture, which we will get at some point. Then I think it would make sense to do, with this build, rather than saying new fixture and then fixture options.
Right.
Because that's, I think that just reads a little bit more cleanly.
Yeah, we did a little bit of builder-like with this, with the null responses. So here we've got null responses, and then we sort of want to set what the stuff we care about for this specific one. What we want to configure is with the use of with.
I would say that's more options-like than builder-like, because it still has the create null wrapping it. And that was because we were sort of following what I'd done in JavaScript and basically emulating its named optional parameters.
Right.
But looking at it, it probably would be a little cleaner to make that a builder pattern. GameService.nulled builder with die roles create null or something like that.
Right. Hey, Sweetie. So XProof asks about, is it acceptable for data objects to have a lot of fields? So what kind of data objects? There's lots of different kinds of roles that data objects play. So sometimes they're data transfer objects, in which case, whatever's needed, use it. Although if it has a lot, I'd be like, what is that API requiring?
It's a bit of a smell. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it could be just, we're returning a bunch of data from an API call. Okay, that's fine. Although if it had like 30, I'd be really, although I've seen 30, so who knows? API design. And so if it's just basically an object that's holding data to return from an API call, whatever it needs. I mean, that's however you're defining the API, and there's no behavior in it. I don't think that's an issue.
But let me tell you about a pet peeve of mine, and this is not going to come to any surprise to you. What I see, and this is probably why I get triggered so much by GameService, what I see in a lot of code bases is people making service objects that do nothing but operate on data objects, and data objects that have no logic in them.
Yep.
And that's the entire architecture. It's like all these service classes, all these data objects.
Yep.
And that, I think, is a real smell, because the power of an object-oriented approach is encapsulation, putting your methods and your data together. So whenever I see people make data objects, I look at it more closely. That doesn't mean it's wrong,
right?
But I always look at it more closely, and I also look what operates on these data objects.
Exactly.
Is it being used as a C-style struct, being passed to a bunch of stateless functions?
Right.
If it is, there is a good chance there's some duplication in the code, because the power of object-oriented programming is it allows you to eliminate duplication by putting the operations on the data next to the data where it can be found and reused.
Yep.
And in a large code base, when you don't have that, then people are often reinventing the wheel.
Exactly.
I think I've shared this example before, but there was a large, I believe it was a Ruby code base at a company I was aware of, where they did sales. They did, coupons and stuff like that. And so there was a lot of financial operations, and their data was in doubles effectively. And they repeated the currency calculations all throughout the code because they didn't have objects that combined them together. And so when they discovered that doubles were a bad idea, which should have come to them a little bit sooner than, not right away.
Right.
When they discovered that, then they had a massive problem going through the code base and fixing it because there was so much duplication.
Yes.
Dota?
I do, Ted.
So there's nothing wrong with data transfer objects in the abstract, but practically I see this sort of service instruct pattern all over the place. Yeah,
and that's why I was like drilling down, I don't know, all right, basically focusing on like what kind of data object is it? Is it just a transfer object where it happens to be that we need to put it in an object? I mean, we could have put it in a map. We can totally do that, and that would get transferred over, but maybe it needs to be in an object for some reason. So for me, at the edge of the system, where I use data transfer objects, it's fine. Where the only behavior is conversion or transformation from domain information to whatever that thing needs, that's fine. But I agree. And the anemic data model, which was what you were describing, is where you've got just objects that have data and all the operations are elsewhere. And what I love about the two code smells, feature envy and primitive obsession, is that they are great guides to fix that. If you see any logic that's operating on data owned by another object, move that logic over. And I have a whole, and I do this refactoring often. There's a nice sequence of automated refactorings to do that in IntelliJ. And the whole thing I call cohere method, because that's what it's doing. It's like, extract it, give it a name, move it over. You might have to do some other things to generalize it. And it's just move the code, like you said, move the behavior, move the logic, move the decision-making, whatever operations, whatever actions, move that to the thing that is responsible for that information. And if you what I like is also, it doesn't require a lot of thinking. Yeah. If you see a logic operator operating on data that's elsewhere, move it to where it is. And you just keep doing that, keep doing that, keep doing that. And then you'll have to do some things like, oh, wow, this class is now too big. How do I separate that out? And then that's primitive obsession. It's like, okay, let's pull these out into all the things that are dealing with this list, these 8 different commands and 4 different operations and so on. So yeah, I mean, that's where like even calling this service, I totally get the being sort of triggered. It's like, oh, is this an anemic data model kind of thing going on here? So yeah.
Which you definitely do not have.
Yeah,
right? You have kind of, I don't know what the smell name for it would be, but you kind of have an anemic service in that it's just making calls on the data model, which is definitely better than an anemic data model. And all design being trade-offs, there may not be a way of solving that.
Yeah.
But it's way better than having a whole bunch of data. There is a balance there to be had, though, because something that I struggled with for a long time was I started working with these companies that had a lot of microservices that effectively weren't doing anything, which is an architectural smell in of itself. Yeah. And really it comes back to team and process design, because if you have to use a lot of do-nothing microservices to keep your teams isolated, then you've got an issue.
Yeah.
But because these microservices weren't really doing anything except turning around and calling other services, a domain model didn't make sense for them.
Right.
And so I don't think you need to have a domain model everywhere. What I do, and that's where the feature envy comes in.
Right.
Primitive obsession drives you towards value objects, and feature envy drives you towards domain model. I think. I don't know. That's probably not 100% true. But of those two, the one that I hit really hard is primitive obsession. And with records now in Java, like that's super easy. Just you see anything that's a primitive or a bare, a low-level collection, toss it in a record, boom. Now it's encapsulated. If you need to change it to a class later, done. You need to add methods later, easy.
Yeah, and what's nice is IntelliJ makes that super easy to do. You just say extract delegate, and it creates the new class and changes all the references. And what I find interesting is, and I do this in every one of my classes, is it then turns a primitive obsession problem into feature envy, because everything is now accessing getters and setters, but they're still making the decisions elsewhere. But now it's really easy to find. You say, what are all the usages of getters? Are they doing something like logic? Oh, extract it, move it over. Anything calling setters? Well, extract it, move it over. That's a command. And it's, as you said, it's like sometimes there are services or microservices that are just integrating. And it's like, fine, you're not going to need a domain model, but
if that's going on, I mean, the overhead for a microservice is really high.
Oh yeah.
And I actually, you see these stories of massive, multi-hundred person dev programmer teams, and you kind of have to ask yourself, what are they doing? And part of what they're doing is shuffling data around, and shuffling builds around, and just dealing with the problems that they've self-inflicted at scale. I'm not saying that scale isn't real, but I do think that this microservices approach that has become really popular in industry to solve a social problem, which is that we do not know how to collaborate without creating crap, that has created more problems than it's solved.
Yeah. Hey, Tom Spencer, thank you for the sub. Appreciate that. Nice to see you.
I was going to say something else about the primitive obsession. Oh, what was it? It was a good thought. It's gone now, though, so it's lost forever.
Hopefully it'll come back. Yeah, like I have a whole presentation I've done on primitive obsession, and like there's just, because for me it comes down to what problem are we trying to solve. Yes, there's sort of the technical problems, but like, why do we refactor? Why do we do all those things? Why is naming so hard? Is because it's a human thing, and having more things with names that are meaningful means that it's going to be easier to understand and easier to work with. Instead of having one big class called account that has 300 methods in it, and I've dealt with that, because, this is single responsibility, it's dealing with account, so it must belong with account. I'm like, okay, no, but good try. But if you start pulling these things out and giving them names, then this magic happens, and you start saying, oh, now this belongs over here. Of course, because it clearly is dealing with billing periods. It's like, oh, of course, so let's move it over there.
And that actually, I remember what I was going to say. That brings me back to what I was going to say earlier, which is that if you're programming, if you're working in something and it's a grind, it doesn't require a lot of thought, but it requires a lot of either duplication. I'm going to introduce something here. So I'm going to put it in the DTO. I'm going to go change this function. I'm going to go change this function. And there's sort of a checklist you follow, but it's kind of boring. If you ever find yourself saying, we shouldn't pair program, or we shouldn't team, we shouldn't use an ensemble because it's just wasting everybody else's time. That's because what you're doing doesn't require a lot of thought.
Right.
And when that happens, that means you've got a design problem.
Yeah.
Because the nature of programming is that mindless stuff gets abstracted away. You should never have significant amounts of mindless work in your code base.
Right.
And when you start introducing these value objects, and then that starts leading you to think about design. And that's a higher order level of thinking. It's not, I know it goes in account, and then I'm just going to hack away at it until it works. Now it's, okay, this is related to account. How do these things fit together? How can I refactor it so that it's a better design? And that is just a different level of thought. It's a challenging thought process, evidenced by my constant whining about your game service, which is probably just fine. And I haven't found a better solution for. Like, it doesn't always have an immediate solution. But you can really feel the difference between I'm just hacking away, grinding away at something versus having to really think about design.
Yeah. Xproof, I played with Micronaut, I played with Quarkus. They're just not as popular as Spring Boot, so I don't play around much with it because that's not what folks ask me about. They're all sort of they're just sort of different library approaches to sort of the same problem, which I'm not sure is a problem other than maybe making a problem, but I won't go there. I on that note, so I used to use Drop Wizard, which was great. It had just the glue code you needed, so you didn't have to keep writing the same boilerplate. And they actually released new versions of it, and I was like, wow, that project's still alive. That's cool. But probably nobody's using it anymore except as legacy code, which they're probably regretting the way they structured the code and are now having trouble probably migrating away from it or something. So. Oh, hey, the Grumpy Game Dev. Thank you for the Prime Gaming sub. Appreciate that.
So should we make some progress on our code?
Sure, let's do that.
So last time, as I recall, we were working on VueController test, and we were migrating it over to use fixtures. And the ultimate thing that we were trying to do, we've been sort of stuck on this for a while, and it's a self-inflicted wound. It's something we're doing because it's interesting for the stream. Probably wouldn't do this in the real world. We're moving from fakes to stubs, and we're moving from a external fake to an embedded stub. And one thing I don't want people to get the impression is that the move from the external fake to an embedded fake would have been really easy. It's the move from the fake to the stub that's the problem.
Right.
And for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, a fake is emulating the behavior of the external system, of the IO-based system, like what I call infrastructure. And a stub is not emulating the behavior. It is requiring it to be configured to emulate the behavior. And the advantage of stubs over fake is that they're easier to write. The advantages of fakes over stub is that you don't have to repeat this setup in all your tests. But there is more state manipulation, as we've been discovering. I prefer stubs to fakes because ultimately, it's really, really hard to write a fake that properly emulates the external service without getting into a lot of nitty-gritty details.
Well, I'm going to disagree a bit on that one because it depends, I think, on what you're faking.
That's true.
So if you're faking something that has a very small interface, then you can do a fine job of it. But if it's trying to emulate sort of all the functionality that you get from a database in terms of finds and queries and so on, And if you're writing any code that starts doing parsing of like, no, that back up, you're going down the wrong road. That's not what you want to do.
Well, that's where I see fakes tend to go, is because once you don't have the discipline of this does not do any real work, I mean, I hate the slippery slope fallacy, but there is a slippery, sort of a easy slide into, oh, well, we've got our fake needs to respond to a query, for example. How are we going to do that? In a stub, it's easy. You just say, given this query, return this response.
Right.
Fake, are you going to sort of mix it with a stub and say, given this query, give this response? Or are you going to try to program in some parsing logic?
Yeah. What I tend to do in that case is basically any query just returns whatever it's got, and you basically push stuff into so in a sense, I'm using the fakes in a very similar way to a stub in that case, where I'm basically pushing it into the fake as a way of configuring it. But yeah, I agree. If in the wrong hands, and I've seen it happen, you can be like, why are you writing all this code to try and emulate a SQL query of this type? It's like, that's not its purpose.
Yeah. Now, there are some really sophisticated fakes out there, like an in-memory database, which is effectively a fake, because nobody's running a real database in production in an in-memory environment. I don't think. There probably is some crazy person out there doing that.
Although SQLite is run in production by a lot of by quite a few people, but that I think crosses the line, and that's meant for
SQLite's in a flat file, right?
Yeah,
it's not an in-memory database.
You can configure it in certain ways, but I agree. Like, something like in-memory H2, nobody's using in production.
Yeah, and the nice thing about that is you can just sort of drop it in and say, "This is my fake," and that's the way it works. So I don't have a hard and fast rule against using fakes. I think my rule is don't write your own fakes.
Yeah. And in that case, I basically stopped using them because they're still slow, relative to sort of nothing like a stub or an in-memory simple fake. And these days, also now with test containers and quick startups of containers, I can just run it directly against Postgres, like we actually do here in the yacht game.
What's nice about that need it?
Yeah, and what's nice about that is now I don't have to maintain two different schemas, because there's always slight differences across databases, and now it's just I just got one.
Yeah, for your low-level infrastructure, like our database wrapper, I want that to talk to the real infrastructure because there is difference.
Yes.
And for the things that talk to that, I want them to talk to a nullable or use some other doubling strategy, so that they're not talking to the outside world at all.
Yep.
An example although I almost always use embedded stubs, an example of where I use an embedded fake is my clock abstraction. So in JavaScript, you've got things like set timeout, set interval, all of that interacts with the system clock.
Right.
And you can't really write code that has timeouts or intervals without having a fake. You can't do that in a stubbed way. Even though I write all my code so that it doesn't use the global set interval function, it operates on the nullable clock. But when I create a null clock, I just use a tool called I think it's from Sign-On. Anyway, I use a fake clock that is out there, and I just embed it.
Hey, Pixie Report. Yes, wrapping the system clock. Absolutely.
Very powerful.
Hopefully, you learn that.
Very rarely done.
Yeah, hopefully you learned that early on. I don't know. I now take it so for granted that when I see people do, it's like, how are you testing that? Are you putting like thread sleeps in your?
Well, I don't know what the state of the art is in Java, but in JavaScript, oh my God, what they do is they use this tool, Sign-On, I think is what it is. Since I wrapped it, I don't remember what it is, but I think it's through the Sign-On project, and it just does a global mock. Like there's this tendency in the JavaScript world of saying, I'm not going to wrap things. I'm just going to, because it's so monkey patchable.
Right.
I'm just going to change the runtime at runtime when my tests are going, and it's all going to magically work until it doesn't, right? And then you're in trouble, like we see with any magic. There's no sort of standard, but the date time stuff has changed enough where you can
now it's pretty easy to abide by an interface if you want to do that, or what I just tend to do is not have any of my domain code take in anything that supplies time. Just pass in the time. If it's
exactly
trying to say, hey, is this thing in the future? Well, pass in today and pass in the date you're checking against, and either it's in the future or not. And I think we've talked about this before. I have a whole bunch of tests in my Ensembler application because it's all about showing, are these events coming up? Are they in the past? Are you eligible for them? All that kind of stuff. So
yeah, and it makes a lot. It's not an obvious design for a lot of reasons. I mean, what Pixie's talking about in the chat is really common.
Yeah.
But it's tempting, I think, because, we were talking last time about what would you write if you were writing 100 lines of code with BASIC line numbers. The obvious thing to do programming something like that is to say, well, what time is it now? And when is this thing going to be?
Right.
And then write that code.
Right.
And it's such a small refactoring to say, tell me, given a time and given a future date, calculate it. Like, it's not hard to pass in that timestamp.
Yeah.
And when you do, it makes everything easier. But because people think, no, I need to know compared to now.
Right.
It's a problem.
Yeah. And that would,
just that little change makes everything easier.
Yeah. And so what Pixie Report says a clock is a supplier of now is the way I used to do testing. It's like, okay, I basically create a stubbed clock and I pass that in, where if you asked it, what is the current date, it returned a configured thing. But I remember reading an article by J.B. Rainsberger, and I know we've talked about that before, is why do that? Why not just pass in the time? And
have your calculations say, given these two times, do the comparison.
And what's nice is when I really started getting into hexagonal architecture and the core domain rule of you must not access things like any external state, like date and time, like random numbers and all the other infrastructure stuff, is it fit very nicely with that rule. Because now it said, well, the rule is you can't do that. You can't even pass in a clock supplier, because even that is at runtime still a real thing, and you're not allowed to do that. And so switching that sort of way of thinking was like, oh, that fits really nicely.
Yeah, and that's the same thing with A-frame architecture. Is the clock is something you put in your application code and your traffic cop.
Yep.
And then when you call the logic, you call the logic with clock.now or whatever your abstraction is.
Right.
And then all your logic code is just working on the data.
Yep.
And it's so clean.
Yeah.
All right, let's so we were in VueController test. And if you would scroll up to the top of this. Okay, so we're creating the fixture. So yeah, I remember now. What we were trying to do is we were trying to modify our code to work with a stub instead of a fake. And we were realizing that the fake required a lot of state manipulation, which isn't necessarily bad, but wasn't, as we looked at it, wasn't good for our test, because our tests were doing a lot of stuff that obscured the point of the tests. And so we added an output tracker to say, well, what is the game service actually being told to do?
Right.
And use sort of an event-like approach to say, well, the game service has been told to start the game, so let's see that it started the game.
Yeah.
And the thing with VueController, if you can pull that up on the right, VueController is kind of thin.
Right.
I think this will be more interesting once we get into your YachtController that's doing the actual HTML, because it's got some logic of its own, whereas this is really just turning around and calling the service. So the tests don't need to do much more than call the method, assert that it called the service, and then it's done. So how far on the left, how far did we get on that?
Looks like we got...
So can't get stored categories.
Yep.
So all the accessor stuff we had it skipped past. We were going to do that later. We were just doing the actions, not the reads.
Right. So that's can. Yeah. So this one we got with the fixture.
Yeah, Pixie, when you've got that kind of interaction, either it's something you would do at the application level, not as pure logic, or if you can say how many random numbers do you need and then just pass in those random numbers. But that's not always possible in every situation.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it just comes back to, can I make this thing 100% perfectly predictable?
Mm-hmm.
And if I can't, then I need to take a different approach. So they're it's involving randoms and I need to do some statistical analysis, or there's some probability or stuff like that, then that's one thing. But those are sort of special cases.
Yeah, they are. Because you're not often writing your own data structures.
No.
And a lot of these data structures, they don't really need random numbers. I mean, some of them do, but some of them just need prime numbers or something like that. So, for example, if you're doing some cryptography thing, which I hope you're not, don't roll your own cryptography.
Please don't.
But you could pass in, here's 2 primes for my signature thing. Okay, so looks like can assign current hand to category is done, but it doesn't look like we did reroll keep specific dice yet.
Right.
So should we just keep on rolling? It looks like this is the last one, actually.
It is the last one, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So let's see. What do we want to do here?
Well, let's look at the code that we're talking to. So VueController.reroll on the right, I think is line 64. Yeah. So we've got keep. Is that keep shared between the YachtController and the VueController?
This class?
The keep class on line 65.
This is used both by the YachtController and the VueController. Yes.
Okay.
Which it really shouldn't be.
Yeah, because it's UI layer stuff, right?
Yeah, this is why I have I never answered the question of where does this belong. But it's a
yeah. When we do surgery or don't do surgery on GameService and that domain model, I think that's when that kind of question will come out.
Mm-hmm.
So it gets the keep data structure that's magically parsed from the post request. Is that how it works?
Yeah. So this is whatever. So keep is basically really is more. It's definitely a DTO, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
This is so it feels like a value object because it's just values, but it's used in parsing and conversion, and that's really all it's used for. It's just a container for that information as it comes in from the remote system.
I probably would. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, so I was going to say this is bad because it's shared across 2 different ways of 2 different adapters, and that's just bad because if we change the API in one of them, we unintentionally change the other one.
Yeah. This reminds me of the same situation we had with database, where I was like, oh, well, let's just make it a value object and have the parsing logic go in the value object, which might be how I handle it. But I feel like I think what's happening here is it's Spring's magic that's making the issue, because this is very obviously a value object type of thing. And the fact that on line 66 and 67, you're turning it back into a primitive and then passing the primitive through, that bugs me. And if I didn't have magic, what I would have is I'd have a little parser function. Maybe it would be here. Probably it wouldn't be on keep. It'd just be right here in the VueController. It would take the raw data, it would do the parsing, create the keep value object, and then pass that through in sort of a checks pattern language, whole value kind of way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, here the magic isn't Spring so much as the library that does the JSON parsing.
That's not a Spring thing.
I mean, Spring uses it, but the library is what is sort of a standard library that's doing that conversion. And so there would be I'd have a DTO version of this, which would basically be, in this case, this is a request. So it'd be a request, an incoming request. And then I'd transform it from that request into the keep value object, and that value object would be part of the domain.
Yeah.
And even though they look very much the same, and this is where, do you decide to decouple it and have two objects that look pretty similar? Or do you...
I would probably convert directly to the value object and just put tests around it that said, given this JSON post, this thing works. So that if it changed in the future, then I could introduce the DTO. But I really dislike having these thin objects that do nothing but transform from one thing to another, to another, to another. So I will cut those out unless they're actually doing something, but I'll put tests around them, because the problem you're raising, that if we change this data structure, now all of our interfaces fail with the outside world, that's a real problem.
Yeah.
But it's not really what we're doing now. So our VueController test is just going to pass in the keep and then confirm that GameService is re-rolling with those values.
Right.
Yeah, so that's what I'm missing here in these tests is because you're passing in the keep, there's no validation that keep behaves the way we expect it to in terms of the parsing. I would probably program this to pass in the JSON or whatever the actual post value is and validate based on that.
Yeah, except that to me would be testing a library in this case, because
it's testing not the conversion of the JSON, but the conversion of the specific data you want to the specific object you want. So I wouldn't test, for example, that it handled 2 commas in a row and all the other JSON crap that you've got to deal with. But I would test that it that given this expected post expression, that we are using that properly in our call to GameService.reroll.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So basically validation that the dice we got in that are held in keep are valid. Yeah.
Yeah. So rather than passing keep into reroll, and again, I think we're running up against Spring Magic because triggering all the Spring stuff is a big pain. But if I could, I would say, VueController.post blap. Here's my string, and confirm that GameService.reroll was run with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or whatever dice we put in that.
Yeah, I mean, we could. I mean, it's easy enough to change this to basically list of integer, and then let Spring figure out. Let Spring do the parsing of that. But that makes it a little harder because the JSON request that comes in. Let's see. So Squeegee asked about that. Let me see if I have that. I think that's in it. But what it comes in as is a JSON object with this string as basically the key, and then the parameter is an array of numbers. So you could basically get it in as a map and then do the extra work to and then just pull it out of the map. That's okay too.
No, I'm not talking about. I like the I like the code, the production code. Other than wanting to actually pass the keep all the way through to GameService.reroll. I'm just saying that the reason that the tests are incomplete right now because the tests pass in the keep, but they don't validate that keep is doing the right thing. Let me show you what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So you seeing this?
Mm-hmm.
So what I would like to do, well, let me show you how I actually solve this problem, which is not going to work for us. But so with the sociable tests, you need them to overlap. You need to overlap all the way from where the data enters the system all the way down. But you're not going to have each one is just sort of going to be a linked chain, right?
Yep.
So the overlapping that needs to happen at the entry point to the system. What do you call that? It's primary or the in adapters.
Yeah, inbound. Yep.
The inbound adapters. The overlap that needs to happen is not just that we are getting an object in, but the translation of the HTTP request to what we care about. I mean, ultimately, the controller is doing that translation. And I'm fine using libraries to do that translation for us, but I still want to test that the translation is happening the way we think it should.
Okay.
So I'm going to just sort of show you what it looks like in JavaScript because we don't have all the types. Well, I suppose we should do with this as well. Like what I'm showing you here is how my real production code works.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would have something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So you see where I'm going with that?
Yep. Yep.
And then this, of course, would be probably abstracted out in some way because what I really care about is this part.
Mm-hmm.
Although actually, I think you have different endpoints for all your stuff. So I probably would keep these as well.
So I could write a test for that, but that request part, what is that testing? So what are you thinking could go wrong?
Specifically, what could go wrong is we've got this JSON object. Let's just call it body.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what it actually is, but it's your body. That body needs to be converted. You still seeing my stuff?
Yep.
That body needs to be converted into a value object, which is happening, or a DTO, which is happening here.
Right.
If this keep is changed so that it's no longer programmed to have a list of integers, maybe we change it to have a map of strings to integers.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, this code will start throwing exceptions because the translation's not going to work.
Right.
But we don't have anything. We don't have any tests that I'm aware of. Maybe I'm misunderstanding something. We don't have any tests that I'm aware of that are saying VueController expects keep to be this specific thing so that the API calls work.
So if so to me that's and I may not have one. There's certainly not.
And I don't think the test belongs on keep because if we make a change to keep, we will change the keep tests.
Yeah.
It's the interaction with keep and everything else.
So that would be a test that would be written sort of in this fashion. So like Tom Spencer says, it's we're talking about now the contract of the JSON payload that the client expects. This is how you want to pass it in, and if we don't transform that correctly to what's expected, then we should have a failing test.
I wouldn't call that a contract test because a contract test, in my mind, is a test that is handed from one team to another. But it is a test that is validating the externally visible API for the
Yeah. Okay. So we're just talking about sort of what we call it, but basically, we're saying that here's what the JSON looks like or should look like, and we should handle it. And if we do want to change that, then we have to. We don't want to unintentionally change that, and so we have a test that confirms that this JSON should be okay.
Yeah. And in my mind, that's what the VueController tests are all about. Like, there's not a lot of logic in VueController, which is good. Like all of VueController and YachtController is, I think, the same way, is just about taking the data from the user, manipulating it, and then calling the thing that does real work. In this case, GameService.
Yeah, and the reason
why if we're not testing that manipulation is being done correctly, what's the point?
Yeah. So I think because we're using Spring in this application, I think the tests tend to be split, because one is I'm testing something that Spring handles, therefore I need to use a Spring test.
Right.
Versus I'm doing something that I can directly call and treat VueController as if it's just an arbitrary class, and then that's that I can do without Spring. So if I want to make sure that I don't unintentionally change keep, or if I intentionally change it, that I really know what I'm doing and I don't break the API expectation, then that would be a test in a different class, just because of now you need to bring Spring into the thing. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That's what it's kind of getting at earlier, that maybe we can't do what I want to do because Spring magic makes it more difficult. But can you bring up the Spring test, the MVC test, I think is what it's called? So I think the difference here is I would check the status and the redirected URL, but I would also put in especially since we've simplified the test so much. Now I think what we could do is we can just add this assertion to that same test, and now we don't have this bifurcation where we've got two different tests in two different files testing one thing. Before, because you've got all this stuff in order to make it testable, it makes sense to have this be a separate test because it really obfuscates things. But now that we've simplified it down so much, I think we could maybe even get rid of VueController test and combine it into that mock MVC if we had the ability to get the fixture in there, which we ran up against last time. I don't think we have the ability to do that.
You can, it's just really hard. And that's why, and because those tests run slower, even though there's what I call slice tests, and so they're not bringing up a whole server, but they are bringing up part of it, and the Spring framework, it takes time to come up. That's where I really try to, even though, yes, it's like I would be nice to have all the tests in one place, I'm sort of favoring speed of being able to run some of these tests versus sort of having it all in one place. So
and I think figuring out how to do proper simulation with nullables which is what I'm doing here on 82. A null HTTP request is something in the node code I'm writing. It is ultimately a simulation of the thing that comes in from the server. And you can pass that into the simulate request method that I have on the server and have it be a fast, entirely in-memory test that feels just like we're calling it from the outside world.
Right.
That kind of simulation is not something I see frameworks permitting generally. And maybe it's something I invented, or maybe it's just not widely used. I don't know. But it's really powerful. And if this was a stream about how can we bend Spring Boot to our will, it'd be interesting to try to figure that out, because it's so powerful. And it leads to so much nicer tests. But as it is, I don't think we have that option here.
Yeah, it might be something that, it might be possible, but offhand, I'm not sure the best way to do that.
Hey, Suiji, that's a great thing to hear. That's the goal. I'm going to keep evangelizing. My next step is to create a library that has all this stuff sort of pre-baked, so people can just start using I'll start out with Node.js, although it'd be interesting to go into Spring at some point. But I'm going to create a library that has like a nullable HTTP request, a nullable HTTP server,
Right.
nullable clock, all these things. And then ultimately, I think to make it really useful, I'll start getting into the popular frameworks. So how can we make a nullable? How can we make all these nullables work with Express? How can we make them work with Spring? How can we make them work with this? Problem is I can only do so much work for free before I start having trouble feeding my family. Yeah. So there's the question of how much can I do?
Yeah.
Or how do I make money off of it?
So Pellet asks about using Output Tracker Listener. So I believe you've published this, even though not as a library yet, but you have published it, and it is, I forget which license
it's in my Testing Without Mocks article. I emailed, for those of you listening, I emailed Ted, said, do I have your permission to release this under MIT license? He said yes. And so it is officially in the Testing Without Mocks article, and it says on it that it's MIT license.
Yep. So that means as long as you abide by the MIT license, you can use it.
Yeah. And then I know Ted and I have been talking about how can we make this stuff more publicly available. Those conversations have kind of been stalled while I've been working on my course, but that's a conversation that we will probably continue at some point in the fairly near future.
Yeah. Can you operate nuclear reactors with it? No comment.
Yeah. Not without paying a lot of money for liability. No warranties.
Yeah, no warranties. So, should we take a break and then come back and figure out what we want to do with this test?
Yeah. I think this has all been a sort of giant sidetrack. It's interesting to talk about how we could do it, but I think once again we're sort of running up against the limits of what Spring will allow us to do.
All right, so let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll figure out what we can do in a reasonable amount of time without a lot of research, and we'll get to do that.
Interesting question in the chat, offering to make you perfect dictator over all things computers, Ted. Did you see that one?
I saw that.
Yeah. So, if you were the absolute dictator, you could make everybody do whatever you want. How would you do it with regards to fakes and nullables and so forth?
So as I mentioned in the chat, it's like I haven't used a perfect or near enough perfect to know what that would be like, because the ones I have that seemed perfect were just awful messes. And like, I feel like if it were a perfect fake, it would just be as heavyweight almost as other things, or as complicated, or as prone to. So I feel like it's one of those things that allows us to be perhaps lazy. And
a
not
fake does, you mean?
Yeah, it's like a perfect fake of a database. Like, oh great, I don't have to use a real one. I'll just use this. I feel like it would make me less thoughtful about the design, because it would just be so easy to just use it directly and use this thing, and it's guaranteed to sort of work. But I don't know, maybe that's okay.
We kind of saw that a little bit, like moving from the fake database, even though it wasn't a perfect fake, it was good enough for your tests. Moving from the fake to the stub has really forced us to think more deeply about state management.
Yeah.
I think my answer to that question, and live coding, I really appreciate you giving me this power over the world, because damn, I want it. My answer to that question is that I would still use nullables, but if the perfect fake was also perfectly fast and transparent, I might use an embedded fake rather than an embedded stub.
Right.
But I'm kind of with you, Ted, in that once you have state management in your nullable or in your double, whatever it is, whether it's a production double like a nullable, or a test double like a traditional fake or stub. Once you have state in there, it's really easy to get sloppy. Like, there's something about having to set up the stub with the state you care about that makes your code really crystal clear about what it's trying to solve. And I think we saw exactly this in the VueController test. Like it really forced us to think about what are our responsibilities, what's coming in where, how does our state management work? And I think we found a real flaw in that the tests were doing a whole lot of stuff that weren't relevant to the thing that was under test.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's one of those that you tend to use, you tend to do things according to the tools you have, and if the tool is almost too powerful, you like, I feel like I always feel like, you know, a tool like Mockito is exactly this, right? It's similar but different. Like it's very powerful. You can do so many things with it, and therefore you don't think about it a lot until you sort of get your, you know, put yourself into a corner. It's like, oh crap, now I'm not even sure what's going on.
I mean, that's that thing we were talking about earlier. If your programming work feels like it's rote, it's, I think it's human nature to shy away from that sort of higher order thinking. And just do the stuff that's easy and rote, because you can sort of turn off your brain and just go away, you know, type away. A lot of people don't get enough sleep these days, so even then, it's convenient to not. Sorry, I just saw Suiji's comment about the lemon. Nice callback. And when you have these tools, particularly the magical ones like Mockito, that allow you to do a lot of stuff without having to really think through your design, I think that's a real flaw.
Yeah.
Because the advantage of test-driven development is that it forces you to think through the tough spots of your design. Otherwise, it doesn't work until you start working around it, instead of thinking it through.
Right.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and write the proper test for reroll to keep specific dice. I really wish that we could do more like what I've got sketched out, because I feel like these tests are kind of anemic. They're just saying call this method, which turns around and calls another method.
Yeah, and it's testing like like sociable light is maybe like just saying, does this middleman do its job? And
it's not even that. Does it do half its job? Half of the job is to parse the request.
Right, it's only half the job, right? Yeah.
And the other half is to call the function, and that's the less interesting half.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's necessary, but it's not terribly interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's why I was like, well, when you get to YachtControllers, at least can be a little more interesting because it's doing real work. But the VueController is doing real work. It's just sort of hidden away by the post mapping stuff. But yeah. But it is what it is. So I think we can just go through and call assign role to category. No, that's not it. We can call reroll and then pass in the keep object. So line 102 and 103 will keep. Line 95 through 100, I think, will be able to go away and be replaced by the fixture. And feel free to delete all my pseudocode there, line 78 through 90.
That's interesting. Sorry. Not sure if your code together it got disconnected.
It seems to disconnect. No, it seems to. Oh, yeah.
Oh.
I don't know what's going on.
Okay. I'm going to just...
Nope, I'm seeing you still.
Okay. So, I'm going to leave that there for a bit. Actually, I'll look on. Okay. So, what do we want to do? We said...
I think we can comment out at least line 88 through 93.
Yeah, because that's all stuff that's pushing...
If you scroll up and look at our previous test, I think you can steal some of that. So we're going to want line 66.
And
I don't know about 67. I think just 66 to start with.
I think we have to roll in order to re-roll.
Do we? Because we're just setting it up. It's stateless, right? So.
Well, let's try it.
Yeah, I think These 3-hour streams are nice and beefy, but 3 hours over the course of 2 weeks, it all goes out of my head by the time we come back to it. I can't remember how anything works. Again. So we're creating the fixture. The fixture should give us the VueController.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, we're going to call VueController dot reroll with the keep value. And we're going to assert that the game service or the tracker, fixture.tracker's output should be equal to a reroll event with the specific dice we wanted to reroll. I think that's it.
So this should be a new game event.
I don't know if we have the reroll.
We do have
get
a
dice
reroll. Yes. And so that's
1, 2, 4.
1, 2, 4.
If you change the DB implementation, the state change of roll is not going to be persisted. I'm not sure what you're getting at there, Suiji.
So this is, well, let's see what happens.
Because GameService is the one that's concerned with the database. That's transparent to VueController.
Yeah, so what happens here inside of reroll is it's going to go grab from, where is it? So it takes that, and then game itself, when it does the reroll, actually that.
So it needs a hand of dice to start with.
Yeah.
So I guess what
it needed dice to have been rolled so that you can reroll. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the way we worked around this in the previous test was we just did a roll dice. And that's the roll dice you were saying we needed to do.
Yeah, that's what my the part of my brain that remembered that.
So we need to tell it to roll the dice. We need to tell it which dice to roll. Can you close the test because I'm having trouble seeing everything? Okay. So the issue, I think, is that we still don't have the ability to set up the game service with the database in the state we want.
Right.
So we're using the roll dice to sort of work around that. But GameService.roll dice is going to be randomly generating 1, 1, 1, 1, 1.
Right.
So what we need to do is we need to tell the game service which can I look around for a moment?
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to say with die rolls 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Right.
So our create fixture needs to be able to take the die rolls.
Right.
As an optional parameter. Yeah, Pixie, we are slowly but steadily solving that problem by moving away from the fake to the nullable. But until we have everything moved over, we're limited to what the fake can do.
So should I create an overloaded
Hold on one second. Let me look at game service again. So right now, game service, when we create the nulled version, we use the delete me impl,
yes.
which is our fake.
Yes.
And we could set it up in the state we want by just adding the ability to set the snapshot.
Yeah, I mean, eventually we want to get rid of the delete me and go back to the and basically finally replace it with a game database create null.
Ultimately, if we're dealing with multiple layers of dependencies, something has gone wrong.
Mhm.
So passing in the game database state to the game service create null feels wrong to me.
Yeah.
We need to tell the game, we need to operate on the level the game service cares about.
Yeah.
So I think that doing the role that we did in, I remember saying on line 67 that that was a hack to just get it to work.
Right.
So what do we really care about? In this one, we just wanted the game to be started. No, that wasn't it.
We wanted the game to be in a position where we could assign a category, which means that we had to have had a role. There has to be a current hand.
Right. Yeah. And if we could create the game service in the state that we wanted, we would just create a game with a current hand. I think that's what we want to do. We want to pass the game service a game. Here's the game that you're operating on. Is that correct? I'm saying that, but I don't know if I believe it.
Yeah, if we could basically say operate where you're always operating on this game, sure.
Okay, we've had this conversation like 3 times now.
Yeah,
and every time we're like, yeah, we already have a with game. The problem is that the game database, we're using game database. So what we need to do is just change this line here to say, how is that constructed? Is it new?
I think so, yeah.
I'll let you fix that up.
Yeah.
But that gives us it's the with game that we've been struggling with. We don't have that ability yet.
Right.
But if we do it this way, then we do have that.
So
can you make that work?
Let's see.
Yeah, Suiji, you beat us to it, I think. I didn't see it when your comment came in, but that's exactly what I had in mind.
It needs to be game data interface. Okay. That should have been fine. I think in here we didn't define it that way, so let's define it that way here.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So now we can do save game. And it's lowercase game snapshot. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And then we also have to use it up in our...
Yeah, because it's still unused.
Yeah, so instead of saying new delete me impl, oh yeah, line 146 needs to be let me fix this real quick. So instead of doing this, we'll do that. Here we'll use it. Is that right?
I think so.
Yeah, Pixie, that's how we've got it programmed. I don't think, I think a proper low-level implementation would actually be a stub that took a variety of parameters. One would be for what's stored in the database. You might have another one for saying, given this literal query string, return these rows back. But we haven't needed to do anything more complicated than just saying, here's the one game. So what happens if we...
I'm just okay. So instead of GameService create null, we need to have a version that takes the null responses.
Well, hold on one second. Can I type?
Yes.
I'm going to make an overload for create fixture that takes the game.
Yeah, that's what I was going to do.
And then this actually gets back to what we were talking about earlier. I think the builder pattern is actually probably better here than the new nulled responses, but that should work. Am I missing anything there?
Just a paren. There we go. Right.
And then up here, we should be able to say create fixture game. I'll let you fill that in. I don't remember what it is.
And this is a hand of dice.
That's a good question, Suiji.
So I think we can get rid of this now because we've replicated that.
I'm fixing it, Suiji.
Right, and then
did I stop on your cursor when I made those changes?
Nope.
Or did it do it in parallel?
Nope. I was able to do what I needed. So,
okay, so that should now work.
Let's see. Oh, because we have still got. Well, hold on. We got roll dice, which we no longer need.
All right.
I'm like, those numbers look familiar. Now we've got an off by 1.
Are you sure?
It certainly looks like an off by 1. So these are what's confusing about the API is it's not keep these dice that have been rolled this way.
It's keep these positions.
It's keep these positions, yeah, which are, so it really is 0, 1, 3.
Yeah. So I think I'd like to change this to make it a little more clear. So is that the way it's supposed to behave?
0, 1, 3. Yes. It's been a while since I've run into an off by 1 error.
What'd you say?
It's been a while since I've run into an off by 1 error.
Well, yeah, I mean, for you it was an off by 1 error. For me, it was just a misunderstanding of how it worked. I thought it was saying keep these dice numbers, not these dice indexes.
And I knew it was indexes, which is why I was sort of going back to here, which is these are get dice indexes to keep. Right. But even the name of the class should be keep or kept indexes or keep indexes to make it really clear that that's what it is, because while it technically doesn't matter which 6 you keep, it's still positional, and that's just the way it came out.
So before we set this aside, I want to show you the rest of what, if I were to write this all in one test, what it would look like. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So we'd have the we'd say post to this URL with, sorry about that. We'd say post this URL with this body. And I don't know if this is the right string, but whatever. We'd simulate the request. And then I would actually probably do, and this drives people a little crazy, but I'll put multiple assertions in the same test. So I would say that the response is equal to that. We'd assert that we did the reroll, and then I'd assert that the response contains exactly something.
Yep.
And I just put those both in the same thing. And let's see, you've got your web test. Where do we have reroll? Do we not have a reroll in here?
Doesn't look like it.
Web tests?
No, I think.
Oh, VueController web test, I think is what we're looking for.
Yeah.
There it is. Yeah, so that would be this effectively.
Right.
And not only, I would actually not just do the, is it 200? But I probably, the way my real code works is it's, I have custom assertions that say, for example, view page dot assert response 200. And then it will take regexes so that I can see that just that a particular magic string that I expect to be in the response is in the response.
Right.
Another way I do it is I will say, and I don't think this would work for you, but I might say, because Spring is different, but I could say things like assert response, view dot okay, or reroll response.
Yeah, you could. I mean, so this is a post, so I wouldn't necessarily expect a response. Depends on, of course, how the API is defined. But in the web MVC tests, you actually can do things like assert against the response and actually give it an object, and it'll do the comparison as if it were JSON or other things like that.
Yeah, actually, since this is a post, what I'd probably do is I'd do an assert redirect, which is that this goes back to foobar.
Yeah, I mean, for VueController, it's pure API, so I would expect. I mean, again, it depends on what the API is. But if the post were just, hey, we accepted that, I don't know that I'd necessarily have a response body for responding to an API.
Yeah, post. I mean, whatever the assertion is.
Yeah.
And maybe it is in this case just it's a 200 response.
Yeah.
But that's basically what I do is I assert that it does the thing it's supposed to do.
Right.
However, I'm going to assert that, and I think this is clean, and then it returns the thing it's supposed to return.
Right.
And if it's really complicated, I'll split this up into two things, but typically it's actually like, this is usually the whole thing. This is the test.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. It's like, you preface this by saying, I'm going to put multiple asserts here. And there's this just bad recommendation that's like one assert per test method. And
it's very dogmatic.
It makes no sense. It's like one conceptual thing. It's like, what do we, there are multiple things going on. We both expect it to return something. That should be what we expect, that it was accepted. And also, as a side effect, it should have forwarded that instruction to do something. And so both of those are part of what we're testing. And this idea that you'd have to have that as two tests is I think it's a misinterpretation of what the original advice was, which is sort of one conceptual assertion, like what this behavior does stuff. What do we expect it to do? Yeah. Now, if you find yourself a lot of asserts, then maybe you're testing too far at a distance or too much.
Although when I'm doing parsing, I will typically write a little helper method, assert parsed, blah, blah, blah. And then I will put 10, 20 parse assertions, each with a message saying, handles two equals together, handles two ampersands together, handles a less than and a greater than, blah, 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 blah. And I'll just go down the list, because when you're doing parsing, there tends to be a lot of little weird edge cases that you need to resolve.
Yeah, I think, it's one of those where it's okay sort of guidance, but it's certainly not a hard and fast rule.
Yeah, I haven't run into people who are really dogmatic as much about that as much lately. I think because TDD just isn't practiced as much as it used to be. Mm-hmm. The folks who are inclined to follow dogmatic advice have moved on to the next fad. But 5 years ago, I saw people who were like really militant. There must be one assert per test, and if you don't have that, then you are bad and wrong.
Yeah, no, none of that here.
So anyway, that's how I would have handled the other half of what's this method is doing. But I think we can delete the pseudocode now and possibly even check in.
Is there anything we want to clean up on the right side just yet?
Sorry, I'm looking at my screen, so I don't have a right side.
Oh,
there is something. Yeah, there is something that I think we want to clean up in the tests, but not anything we want to clean up in the game service yet. But now that we have the ability to do the with game, I think that's going to simplify things quite a bit for us.
So minor thing, would you pull out the duplicate code between these two?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, okay. That was just. Yeah. Can I do it?
Sure. I was going to do it through refactoring, but.
That's what I do.
Okay.
Does that still work?
I was just going to run the test, see. Yep.
Yeah, I know you could have done that with the refactoring, but.
You want them to do it, so you go for it. All right.
Don't check in yet. There's one other thing I want to do here.
Oh, okay.
And that is, we had a little bit of a hack up here. Where was it?
Oh, right. Yes. So we can now get rid of. Are you talking about 69?
Yeah, right here.
Yeah.
So here, I think what we can do is probably the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
We do that. I don't know that we need this tracker.clear anymore. Go ahead and try that. See what happens.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I think that cleans everything up. We're not done in here. We haven't handled the queries.
I'm just looking at the other ones. See.
Yeah.
So cool. I like that. I like that we got rid of the clear tracker because that felt
it wasn't terrible, but
it felt.
Yeah, the state manipulation of calling the game service to get it in the right state, that was bugging me.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have caused us problems in the future when we changed away from using the mock or using the fake to using the stub, because it doesn't have any state. So we've, it was just reroll keep specified dice. I have not yet, Suiji, but I can certainly imagine that it's possible. And one thing that I've never spoken about publicly is that the nulled state doesn't have to be done at instantiation time. For example, when I first did it, I actually said nullable.make null. And it was just something that you could run on an existing object and turn it into a nulled object. So I ended up moving away from that because it was a sort of a two-step process, create the thing and then make it nulled. And it turned out that I always wanted it to be nulled from the beginning. But it has it has sort of run through my brain that if sometimes there might be something a little weirder where you want to convert something into a nulled rather than starting out with it being nulled. And whether or not that's related to your question, I don't know, maybe, but I haven't yet needed to do it, but there's nothing that's really stopping you.
Yeah, I'm now thinking like I wonder, because we just suggest that maybe that would help the with the Spring. Who's in charge of creating this stuff? I wonder if that would help.
Oh, right, because our big problem with the Spring is that we don't have control over the game service being created, but we do have access to the game service after it's created.
Yeah, well, or we do, but it's really awkward and might be more work to get it sort of configured up front with test configuration, like basically a bunch of verbose work versus just let it happen normally, and then we'll, in the test, put it in nullable.
Yeah. I mean, you've just checked in, right?
Yes.
So let me do a little pseudocode. We should theoretically be able to do something like where's our new? Yeah, we should be able theoretically just be able to do this. Score category, yeah.
Right.
Continue on down the line. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, Suiji, I don't think you'd even need to have it create an empty nulled game service. You just have it make a normal game service and then nullify it.
Yeah.
The only reason I haven't done this is because it makes me feel a little bit weird. Like, I like the idea of thing being either nulled or not, but switching from one to the other, we are sort of mucking around with the private data after it's been created. And maybe it's my general preferences for things to be immutable that has sort of crept in over the last 5-10 years of my programming. But it does feel like there's potential for some weird interactions.
Yeah, I mean, they are defined as final. So we'd have to basically drop the final, and yeah. I mean, it might make things easier, but I also think like one of the things that again, it's one of those where, okay, the first time we do it, it's verbose and awkward, and then we just encapsulate it and never have to see that ugliness again, and then we can use the sort of the quote proper way to configure it. But again, sort of hide that behind a library. So sort of a null test configuration thing might be interesting.
Yeah, I've mentioned the idea of bending Spring to our will.
Yeah, that's a way of doing it.
Yeah, I'm more inclined to like. I mean, I hate doing it, but I do it far more often than I want to. But when I'm using one of these more magical types of things, I will just get in and I will learn how it works, and I will really, really understand it, and then I will, I'll make it do what I want, as opposed to something like this, which is not actually bad or wrong, but it feels like it's solving the problem in the wrong spot.
Yeah.
Like if the problem is Spring, let's solve it in Spring.
Exactly.
If we can.
Exactly, right. I'm not 100% sure we can. I think we can, but if not, then that would be an alternative way of doing it.
Yeah. So if we go back to VueController test, there's a couple of things in here. So we've gotten all the commands working now, and I love this. I love how pretty it is.
Me too.
This is super nice, and it actually really works well even for this case, which is a little more complicated. So what I want to do is I want to go back through and I want to do the accessors.
Right.
So we don't, and that actually should be done now, right? Um, Now that we have the ability to create the fixture with a particular game,
Mm-hmm.
we should be able to, oops, um, should be able to just say, I don't understand what this assertion is doing.
It's basically saying that when you start a game, you can get the current hand.
But this is actually going to be a little bit better of a test, right?
Yeah, because
now we can assert that it's got 65432 in it.
Right.
I'm going to let you write that assertion because I don't know what the actual thing is.
So that should be. Let's delete that, and then that's that, and then this should just be contains exactly. This needs to be.
Find it interesting. Oh, VueController returns current hand. Can you? Okay, so it gets the game service and then it creates the. I like that. So we're actually testing something real and not just that we're calling a method. It's doing the data translation, so that's nice.
Yeah, I'm going to force it to be wrong because I want to see it. See that we're actually testing the right thing. And
perfect.
Yep, perfect. Fails exactly as we wanted.
And you know what the nice thing about this is if we end up changing the game service so that it exposes these things differently, like it exposes a game object rather than individual methods, when we come through and we refactor VueController to support that, the test will still work. And that to me is the sign of good sociable tests, is we can do design changes and the tests don't break.
Right.
So, and I can see that we've enabled that behavior here. So that's really good.
All right.
So same thing for get scored categories?
I think so.
Go ahead.
So in this case,
so we need to just create the game with the scored categories already defined in the game, right?
I think this is basically doing it. So yeah, so we can instead of doing the no op version, we can basically say that it has. We could do a bit more here. I don't know.
Yeah, I see why you did that because manipulating the state feels a little bit awkward. But now that we don't have to manipulate the state, we can actually put the data in that we care about and have it be a little bit. Because no op it just feels to me like there's too many opportunities for that to have a false success. Oh, it is stateful though.
Yeah. So we still have to drive the game a bit if we wanted something other than sort of the initial state.
Yeah, unless we wanted to like poke it in with a snapshot, but I don't like that idea.
Yeah, that's sort of I mean, it's
let's go ahead and drive the state a little bit. It does make me wonder what could we do differently about that, but oh, that's a damn good roll.
So let's go create a fixture.
So I got a stylistic question for you. On line 33, you put a blank line between your game setup and the fixture. And on line 57, you didn't. I prefer line 57's approach, but I was wondering what your thoughts were on
I think that was
because that's all one conceptual thing.
That was just an artifact. Yeah. In fact, I think I saw that here too. Yeah. No, I like for the most part, setups to be setups.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we set the game, that the total score It's not going to be equal to 0.
But we don't even. Oh, so this is doing both. It's getting the total score and the categories.
Right, because that's part of what the DTO is converting from the domain.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yes.
It's 25? I don't remember. Here we can actually say contains exactly 5s. What is this? Oh, there's a score category view. So let's say, score category.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is 5s. Right? Yeah, score category. Oh, it's scored category. So that's a little bit messier.
What is scored category? That's another DTO, right?
This is a value object from the domain. So this is basically sort of the row of your scorecard. So this is the category, the hand of dice,
right,
and the score.
Interesting.
So did that do it right? What is this? Yeah. I wonder if this is a bit too much. Well, let's see.
Oh, I expected that to work. Well, that's charming. Oh, you know what's happening?
Oh, right, because it gives you because this is for the view. This gives you the all the scored categories, and so it shouldn't be contains exactly. Like I didn't care about the contents; I just cared about the length. We could say contains.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's get this to pass because I have something I want to do that I think will clean this test up a bit. It doesn't look like there's a dot equals on there.
There's not a on the view there. Yeah, because it's a view, I tend not to implement equals in hash code. Yeah, let's just do a 2-string.
That looks like the dot equals didn't work properly.
No, the score average is null. Because it
didn't do the request.
Because somewhere somebody's supplying null for, because that's the default is null. So I guess that. I feel like this is testing stuff that we don't care about.
Yeah, well, this is where collaborative-based isolation comes in. That's what I was going to go next. So can I drive for a second?
Yeah.
So as we've talked about, but maybe not everybody has heard, collaborative-based isolation is when you call the dependencies method as a way of getting the expected value. So in this case, we'd say game.score. And you make that run?
You got it.
Did I? What was it? Control R?
Yep.
Yeah. There's so much that doesn't work with my with my IDE the way it's set up. So I think similarly, we should be able to do contains exactly on game dot scored categories.
Except these are the views, so we have to do one more step. So we'd have to do the.
Go ahead.
We'd have to do basically
the game scored category view from that.
Score category view from the view of. And then an empty map. Oops. So that returns a list.
What's that error? I'm not seeing it.
That's what I'm trying to figure out. So that's list the score category view. Not sure what this is saying. So, oh, because we're passing a list, so this should just be equals. There we go. Because we're comparing two lists, we're not giving it a bunch of things.
Oh, right, of course.
Yep.
And then I would probably pull out that score category view into a variable called expected categories. Actually, no, I would put the I think it would be expected categories. At first I was thinking maybe we'd keep the view of in the assertion, but no.
Yep.
Yeah, so this situation here is exactly why I use exactly the type of situation where I'll use collaborator-based isolation, where we don't actually care about all the details of how it gets the data, just that given this data, it's using it. It's a little bit of a slippery slope because it does feel like we're repeating the implementation exactly.
Yeah.
So I try not to use it, but it is a tool I'll pull out of the toolbox when we start seeing the stuff you were seeing there. It's like, oh my God, setting all this up, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by that, Pixie. It's somewhat similar to using a spy, except that it's a sociable test, so it is running the real code, which means that if we change the behavior, in VueController, the test will break, but if we change the behavior in, say, scored category view, the test would continue to pass.
Right. So because that's what we want from this test is this test is about, and some of the ways the way I think about what a test is, it's a change detector. And so if we change VueController without changing the test, this should fail. But if we change, like you just said, if we change view of, that's not the job of this test to detect that change. That would be in somewhere else.
I really like that approach of thinking about it, like tests as change detectors, because honestly, I mean, yeah, the test-driven development loop, it makes me think about my code in detail, and I like that. But if that's all it was, I could delete the test and I'd never care again.
Right.
But the change detector aspect is really the important thing for me. And a lot of that change detection actually comes in expected interactions across the system.
Right.
Unexpected interactions across the system, which is why I like sociable tests. Collaborative-based isolation is a way of having sociable tests and not having to use mocks but sort of cutting off that sociable aspect. So if we change the behavior down in the system, the test won't fail.
Right.
And that's actually not a positive in my mind. Like I will pull it out. A good example is that I expect this dependency to change a lot and I don't want my test to break. So that's when I'll pull it out. When we're pulling it out in this situation, because the thing is hard to manipulate, that's a little bit of a smell in terms of the design. Maybe it should be easier to manipulate, but it's a very small smell because sometimes you just have stuff that's hard to manipulate.
Yeah, I mean, certainly this is one of those cases where the view of would likely be changing much more frequently than the underlying code.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've actually, in my real production code, I've moved away from collaborative-based isolation to the point where if I have a constant in my production code, I will hard code it in my test, because when I change that constant, I want to see the test fail so I can think about it.
Yeah.
And so I am okay with my test failing to inform me about something, because then I can just look at it and say, yep, check, that's correct. I changed the test.
Right.
An example of that is I have some code that makes assertions about the copyright date at the bottom of my file. And before I replace that with, well, what's the current year? Like every year I change the copyright date and I say, yeah, okay, this failed, and this failed. But that was good. It's like, okay, so this code is handling the copyright date, and this code's handling the copyright date, and this code's handling the copyright date. And eventually I said, well, let's only handle that in one spot.
Right.
And let's make it based on the date.
Right.
But having that reminder was actually really nice. I don't know if that's making sense at all. I didn't get a lot of sleep last night, so don't expect coinage from me today. I like the way you summarized that, Pixie. TDD is design dialogue, test is change detectors. I think that's a really good way of thinking about it.
Yeah, if you have to fix that many tests, then you got some problems.
Yeah. So yeah, either your tests are overspecified,
right,
or they should use collaborative-based isolation. Or what was the case in my situation is I had a design flaw. Like I was, I don't remember exactly what the situation was, but it's in the footer. It should have been in one template, and I think it was in multiple templates. And it was pulling the constant out of a config class. So it wasn't like I was manually typing in 2023 everywhere.
Right.
But when I changed that constant, then I had multiple things fail. And I think eventually the way I solved it was I just cleaned up my template duplication.
Yep.
I moved the footer into the right spot as opposed to the quick and easy spot where I had it previously.
Right. Yeah, when I came up with this idea of change detectors some while back, and sometimes I forget about it, but like thinking about what is this test testing? What do we expect? When do we expect this test to fail? Is like what, because we always, I think a lot of times we think about our tests as regression. Like that's great. We want to look for unintentional, but a lot of times like we go in and change things on purpose, and we want to make sure that, what are we actually testing here? And here we've highlighted what we're testing, and it's just that scoring categories goes and grabs the right thing from the game and assembles it. But how it assembles it, I don't care. Yeah, because I don't know, I may not care about it, but if it's complex enough to be tested, it's tested elsewhere. That this one is solely about, is this doing the right thing? Not, is this doing the right thing?
Sort of related to that, when I'm writing tests, I mean, in addition to being that dialogue with my design, when I'm thinking about what test do I want to keep, because when I do TDD, I don't write one test and then one production and one test and one production. I write a test, I do a little production, then I change the test, right? So I'm very thoughtful about which tests am I keeping as documentation and change detector for the future. Yep. And what I'm thinking is, what will I get wrong? Like, what will I and the other people on the team get wrong? But mostly it's me. What am I going to misunderstand? What am I worried about that I could change and inadvertently break something? And that's what I'm keeping in my tests as sort of the ongoing change detector for the future.
Yep.
I think we're done with VueController tests now. Did we do them all, or do we have another one? Oh, we do have another one.
That one's fine.
Assign current hand category. Oh no, that's
fine. That's fine.
Thank you. Yeah, I think
we are done.
All right. Well, let's check it in and then take our next break.
Yeah. Yeah, because this is a command. I think the rest are all commands. This one is the other one, but we fixed that one. Yeah, well done. So
Yes, Luigi, I think that's a good point as well. I will typically sort of do a pass through the test when I'm done with something, sort of like in the position where we are now. And I'll think, is this speaking clearly? Am I going to be able to understand this in the future? I find that if I do that too early, I will create abstractions that end up having to be backed out because they don't end up working for later tests.
All right, let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll figure out what we're going to do next.
Sounds good.
All right.
So yeah, I think what we have next to do is the YachtController tests. And YachtController is more interesting in that they're doing more, but I think the tests are going to be kind of the same thing, right? We'll just sort of run through them and follow the same pattern.
Sure. So by the way, this is that test configuration that we might be able to expand on, make easier to control.
Yeah, that comes back to
but
how do you make it do what you want? How do you set up the game you want? And Suiji's suggestion of, well, let's just configure it afterwards.
Right, and I just realized why that's because this gets called before any of the tests run. That was the problem.
Right. Yeah, and different tests are going to need different games, just like we demonstrated in the previous one.
Yeah. But that's not what we want to look at right now. And we can close that. And that.
Yeah, I guess if I were trying to bend spring to my will, I would look into what is the flow that causes that to get called, and is there a way I could make it happen inside the test instead of before the test?
So I understand it well enough that you can't. There is some stuff around lazy that I think you'd basically be plugging it at a lower level than I might be comfortable with. Because it's creating a proxy, and then can you access that proxy to basically swap it out with a different one? There's some risk involved in are we doing something that perhaps is
so Suiji's suggestion of like introducing a nullify method might be the right way to do it then.
Unless there is a more standard way. There's stuff around context. I might have to explore that more.
It does feel like just having a nullify method call would be like, because then you could put that in your create fixture and have it just go. Whereas if you've got context and it's multiple classes or something like that.
Yeah, the problem is you don't know if it's already been injected into other things. Now what do you do? Mm-hmm. So if GameService is already created and injected into the controllers, and you've now changed which one, how do you change? That's why it creates proxies, is so that it can do that at runtime. And I'm not sure. I think I might rather have a nullify method than try to play around with dynamic proxies.
The nullify method, it doesn't feel like a real smell to me. It's just, I would probably do that instead of create null. Like I'd have nullify. I might have a create null that just turns around and calls nullify, but most likely I would have one or the other, not both. Okay, so can I look through this code?
Yeah.
Alrighty. You seen me click around?
Yes.
Hey, we might actually, I probably shouldn't say anything.
Don't say it. Don't say it.
But could go a whole 3 hours.
No, now it's going to break.
No, it's too late. I didn't say what. Okay. We got to appease the lemons. So reroll generates new roll, including kept dice. So this is making a bunch of random rolls. It's creating the YachtController. It's starting the game. So there's our state management.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting the list, the keep, which it's presumably passing in. Yeah, right here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's doing, again, state management.
Right.
I don't know what this concurrent model is.
That's because you don't get a response. You get, in order to do the Spring MVC, it creates a map of the content, and that gets passed in as a parameter as opposed to return. There are different ways of doing it, but this is one way of doing it.
Yeah. So what we've got here is, I think, some relevant setup, some expected values, or some relevant setup.
It's also
state
set up,
management,
yep.
state management, assertion management. We'll be able to replace quite a bit of this with just, did the game service get called?
Right.
Or did the game service reroll event run?
Right.
After 3 rolls, then can reroll as false. That feels like domain logic. So there's probably something else going on here. Yes, this is checking the can reroll.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and that's it.
Yeah.
There must be other tests then. So are we going to keep these all in multiple test files? Because if we do, we're going to have a shared fixture across all of them. We'll have to figure out a way of doing that.
They might be shorter that I might be okay combining them, or we can just create a factory either way.
Yeah. Well, let's start out. Let's just choose one of these things to do. Let's see how it goes. I'm just looking through these. This one's really small. This one's pretty small. That one's pretty small. That one will stay separate. Let's start out with a sign roll test. See if we can simplify that. If it gets nice and small, then we can combine the other, and we'll put the fixture in here for now. We can factor it out if we want to continue to use multiple files, or we can combine the files together.
All right.
How's that sound to you?
Sounds good.
Okay.
So let's see. So here, we want to basically get rid of that state change, and we want, what is our, so this does with the die rolls.
Yeah, we're not going to care about die rolls.
We just want to create the game. So let's go back here. So,
let's go ahead and bring over our fixture. We're going to change it. Actually, will we change it?
From the VueController?
Yeah, from the VueController test.
Well, this will be different.
Yeah, so let's just cut and paste it.
Yeah.
I'm okay with a little bit of duplication in our tests.
So
I don't think it's such a big deal.
Grab that. Actually, let me grab. We could, no, I won't do that. I mean, we could generify this, but I'm not going to.
Yeah, like with a template.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm going to put this at
third time. I'm a big believer in 3 strikes you refactor, not 2 strikes you refactor.
Yeah. So let's take that out.
Actually, that one we'll probably want to keep.
Sure. Whoa, that's interesting. That's interesting. I did a copy paste and it cheated. It totally cheated. It's like, what? I did I didn't even do a refactor. I just did a copy paste
and it didn't do it consistently across all of them.
Well,
I guess that was the
it's no, don't do that. I think that's a bug.
Line 39 as well.
Yeah. Grab that and then that'll, yeah, did this here too. What are you doing? Ugh, I can't spell. Okay, so let's go take that.
So before you start modifying the test, I'll let you finish here.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you go back up to the test, I I do not love that name because it's just describing what the test does, not what it's testing. Ultimately, so are these, hold on one second. Let me look at this.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, of course it would. It looks like this might have been one of the earlier things you did before you factored out your score category stuff, because it looks like these are all just different variations of testing the scoring logic.
Yeah, I would say that probably the only test out of these that I would keep is this one.
The first one,
Yeah, the first one, because the rest are
just the same thing again.
Just the same thing, and not even testing. They're not even testing the controller.
Okay.
Really.
So yeah, so we can get rid of this and get rid of this. Now this is different. This saying that it redirects the game over page.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. Assign role to all categories results in all categories. Yeah, so these are not, I'm not entirely sure what these are doing, but they're not just duplicates. So this one is really assigns hand to category. Or that's what it is, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Should we rename assign role to category? Can we do that, or is that used?
You mean the method on the controller?
Yeah, in the controller, can we call it assign current hand to category?
Sure, we can call it whatever we want. Because Spring doesn't care, because it only cares about the post mapping annotation. Good. So we're saying we want to call this assign current hand to category. Let's just run our tests. Well, of course that one broke because I commented out. Okay. And now I can comment that out again.
So we should be able to. It's basically it's basically the exact same thing as the VueController test we just did.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I'd probably just grab the setup from that.
So, oops.
In fact, if you want to use that same test name, can assign current head category, I'm fine with that. Oh, did it again.
Why are you doing that? You're trying to be helpful. I get it, but you're not. So don't. So we want. And so then. I think that's. I think that's right.
That looks good to me. Okay. I think this is a case where I might use the collaborative-based isolation again. Just say assert that model get attribute score is equal to game dot score. Because the mechanism of how the scoring is done is really not important to our controller.
No. That's wanted.
What does string.valueOf do?
Converts the score is a number, whereas we're expecting this to be a string.
Oh, right. So how come you didn't do game.score.toString?
Because you can't call toString on a primitive. So score returns a primitive int.
Okay. I think I just used to do empty string plus is how
you could do that, but that's what string value of is saying. It's basically saying convert this to a string.
That makes sense.
Except it failed.
Except it didn't work.
Well, this is that state thing. So, but again, like, do we care?
Oh yeah,
that
actually, we shouldn't be doing any of this.
Right? We just care about the event,
right?
That the assignment happened.
Well, the model. So, what is this concurrent model thing again? This is the return. Like we're sending something back to the
right. So we do care about that content that that it does represent. Right. So this comes back to what is this test testing? And this test is actually testing two things, right? That the assignment happened, so we can add the event in, and that
Suichi's right. Roll result is what gives us the concurrent model. That is just checking the value. We really only do care about the event, but we probably do want another test.
Yeah, so this was trying to combine both into one. We don't currently have one that examines.
We don't have one for roll result.
Yeah. So what does roll result do? Roll result does a bunch of things that I don't think we're testing.
Okay. So let's add that to our list of things to test.
Maybe. Yeah. So that's a question of how are we testing YachtController roll result.
So yeah, if you're okay with that, I'm going to add a comment saying need to test roll result. And all this can go away.
Yeah, now it's just the event.
Oh, are you seeing what I'm doing? Because I think we may have gotten.
Yep.
Okay, good.
Yep.
All right. Did I do that right?
That looks correct.
Okay, that should work.
Yep.
Now, let me just look at the code. So assign current hand to category. So I would want to assert that we got the redirect roll result out of this.
Yes. Definitely.
So do you want to do that?
Yeah.
Although this I might actually do as a separate test. I know we were talking about the single assertion, but the reason I would do it as a separate test is because there's an if statement in there. So I might do test that redirects to roll result and test that assigning redirects to end game. Because right now, it's not that it always redirects. There's actually different situations, so I'd want different tests for each one.
Yeah, so we actually have a test for that situation. We didn't have a test for the
normal case.
the non-game over case. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so putting that in here is, I agree, sort of a little bit of a mixture of like, we really want to check. Basically, it's all about is the game over or not, and that's what we want to test.
Yeah. Can I do that?
Yeah.
This test is passing right now, right?
Let me see. I just added a redirect. Let me just make sure that passes. Then you can pull it out. Yep.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to say that assigning current hand redirects to roll result. And I'm going to rename this one to assigning current hand, assigning last category. It's not assigning current hand, it's assigning category. Redirects to result. Yeah. Then I don't think we care about the dice rolled. So we don't need that. So we don't need that. This we don't care about.
Yeah, it has to be something, but we don't care.
Yeah. So it should be that. Press that. It should run.
Yep. Oops.
Okay, what did I do wrong?
Because the game does need to have a hand, and we didn't roll.
Right.
And you need to pass that into create fixture.
And the reason actually, there's something I do a little bit differently here. I don't think I have my refactorings, but I'll just do it manually.
I was just about to. Yeah, so I usually call that dummy hand because it's a dummy test double.
I don't
I'll fix
remember how
that.
to do constants.
Because it's silly. So,
oh yeah, it's private static final, right?
Yeah, I guess it can be private. And we still need the type, which is hand of dice.
Yeah, dummy works for me. I like irrelevant just as a word because it really stands out. Like this does not matter, right?
And this would be the same thing because we don't care which category we assign it to. Actually, we do because we're checking it
on
here.
That one we do, but on the next one we don't.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, this was the one I was looking at. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, go ahead and pull that out.
No, not both of them. Nope.
I'm not sure if we want the 2-string on that. I'm not sure that we don't want the 2-string. Yeah, I agree with you, Suiji. It's not a huge smell, but if I see a lot of irrelevance, it's kind of like, eh.
Stop it.
Usually it means a fixture is missing. So if you're going to call this dummy score category, I want to change the other one to dummy as well.
I just always have trouble.
I think you call it dummy everywhere else.
Yeah, I call it dummy,
right? So let's
be
stick
consistent
with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, Suiji.
Yeah, so probably if we did this more than a couple of times, then we basically say create fixture with dummy hand, or maybe it just pass it as a parameter. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of it. I think there was this sort of difficult question of how do we manage game state cleanly, which I don't have an answer for. That's what this smell is telling us, is that we've got state management going on that isn't relevant to the test that we're doing just to make the test work.
Yeah, so what's interesting is really the only state in question is about is over. And this is where I'd see people say, well, why drive the object through all this crazy state just to get it to be over or not? Why not just create a mock that when it's asked for is game over, it returns true or not?
Yeah.
And I understand that argument because that's way easier, right? Just say, if anybody asks me if I'm over, say true. And now that's all I care about. And that's great in the short term. Yeah. It's perfect, right? It's one line of setup until you change who's responsible for game over and how that's calculated. And now there are 3 states.
Then
and
you've
now
got
it's
this massive false positive problem.
Yeah. But I totally get that because it's very tempting to say, oh, I only care about this bit. Let me just set this bit and then have it always be returned in this way. Yeah, and I think there's this, and we've talked about this a bunch of times before. It's like, at what point do you say, let's just create a snapshot and restore it from that? It's to really just nail it and get it right into where we want it to be.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll get to this because we are talking about moving to a. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say I don't know where that line is.
Yeah, I don't either. Well, I don't love the just deal with the snapshot, but and I was about to say I don't know if we're going to get to doing this, looking at the design of the domain model, because we're talking about moving to a different project.
Right.
But it would be really interesting to look at it and say, well, instead of having an object that encapsulates its state, could we make the states visible? Or is there another sort of design that makes it possible to create, to basically use more of an immutable object approach?
Yeah.
And see where that takes us.
Yeah.
I think that could be really interesting.
Yeah. I actually have a whole plan for doing that on some streams, where basically I see this thing over and over again. Maybe it's just because I've been doing a lot of game stuff, but like where there's states where basically the state pattern, but not quite state pattern, but where you do have different objects that represent each state. And there's the game over state. And so it still has all the other stuff, but it's all immutable. And now you can just say what happened. And you can't do anything else to it because it is over. And by definition, it's over.
Yeah, it is interesting. Maybe it's just the nature of the people I'm working with these days that it seems like domain models are not really a thing in the code bases I'm looking at, because they're just microservice glue out the wazoo. But I don't see the kinds of state management problems that we're seeing in this code base and that you're running into the Blackjack code base. Not because the design is bad or that our design is better, because it's not, but because it's just not dealing with stateful, like state chart based systems.
Right.
I've always felt, though, that like one of the earlier projects I worked on was robotic control systems for a company that was selling like fab robots. And that was very much state chart stuff.
Right.
And state charts don't really translate to object-oriented programs very well, at least. And I haven't been back to it since then, because again, a lot of the stuff I do doesn't really involve state manipulation, state transitions. But I definitely felt at the time that the object-oriented paradigm did not match well with the state chart problem. But pulling the states out into individual objects, I don't know, that could be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I find like a lot of the business line applications, there's states, right? Is this application, validated? Has this application been approved? Has this thing been paid? Right? It goes from state to state to state. We're still talking about the same policy or the same order, but it, does, and
you're
holds that
right.
state.
The state transitions tend to be fairly simple, though.
Yeah.
And so we don't run into I need to do all this work to get it into just the right state.
Right.
It's, I mean, like the stuff you're talking about, I do see, but it's kind of like, yeah, you can go from any state to any state, just do it. And it's like, there is a little bit of state management, but it's not so much. But again, maybe it's just what I've been working on.
Yeah, because it comes into play when you can't just go directly from to Z. You have to go through A through Y.
Exactly, and more than that, that those logic rules are changing so that you're breaking a whole bunch of tests when you do that.
Right,
because that's the exact problem you ran into.
Exactly. It's like, you can't go from Y to Z anymore. Now you have to go to A prime first, and now you can go to Z.
Because the first time you run into this, it's not a problem. You set up a helper method, it does all the state management stuff, and then you forget about it. But then you come back to it, or you end up with multiple helper methods, and then it's
then you just want to say, well, let me just tell you what the database says and just load it from the database, which is the snapshot.
Yeah. Or let me just set it up with a mock, or, Actually, though, a lot of as I'm thinking about, like, I am working with a company that has exactly what you're talking about. It's one of the pieces of software they maintain is a support tool for their sales folks, and of course, it's going the transactions that they deal with go through a lot of different states. Has to do with mortgages, and why they don't run into that problem is because everything they do involves massive database test data. So they've just got these big databases where they use this one that's in this state or this record that's in this state.
Right.
And of course, it's causing them all kinds of problems because they have a limited number of test databases. They've got a lot of programmers and they're all stomping at each other.
Oh my God.
As they manipulate this stuff. But yeah, that's what they do. They either work with a record that already exists or they insert one that's in exactly the state they want.
Right. That can work for some definition of work.
Yeah, it doesn't work for them. They've got so many bugs. They have
Yeah.
so much. They spend so much time dealing with the fact that they're stamping at each other's database configuration all the time. Um, I observed a team for an hour, and in that time, they spent about 40 minutes faffing about and about 7 minutes programming.
Yes. I remember that situation, that kind of situation very well from a previous company, and it was just like, okay, we need to stop doing this because
Yeah.
QA is stomping on dev's database, and it's like, and even QA was like having real problems saying how do we test this, because like I remember there's one case where you couldn't even get it to that state because that part hadn't been done, and so QA couldn't test it from the outside. It's like, oh, you got to wait till we finish this other feature.
Yeah, I remember watching that and observing them and just seeing that they were spending inordinate amounts of time manually typing things in. And then they'd run into a different bug that would distract them from the thing that they were trying to do. Yeah.
And and people say, why is it taking you so long to do this? It seems so simple. It's like, yes, the actual coding takes 5 minutes. It's the setup that takes an hour, and that's why we're going so slow. Yeah.
Yeah, I had some really good conversations with them about how to fix it, but then their product people were getting upset that things were so slow, and they decided to solve it by giving everybody rewards for finishing stuff faster.
Oh, I bet that works really well.
Not the last I heard. Yeah.
Yeah, what would be better is basically give everybody their own environment, but
that's expensive.
That's
because
that's expensive.
They don't have it set up where they've got isolated tests. So, and they've got hundreds of microservices.
Right.
So it's really expensive to create a test environment. So there's a limited number of test environments.
Yeah. Save money by not doing that. But
anyway,
all right. But we luckily don't have to. We're not quite that in that dire situation. So let's see.
So let's go ahead and add.
We were talking about the is over thing and saying, okay, yeah. So just
So let's go ahead and do. We've got the assigning last category redirects to the game over page. So you can delete the comment on line 58. You can delete the line on line 57. Line 55 probably goes after line 67. Like we'll do that after that one. It drives us all to violence, live coding. I think 56 is the one we need to test next, isn't it? Or revise next?
Yes. So
okay, so roll and assign for all categories. This is that state manipulation.
Right.
Can you look at that method and see what it's doing?
Yeah, so this is a helper method that basically loops through all of them, calling roll dice on and assign to each one, which is
who's using that?
It's only used by this test. It's used by it's used by 2 tests.
So let's duplicate that because we're going to need a version that operates on the game rather than the game service. Maybe instead of duplicating it, how about a method called create game with all categories assigned?
Oops. Sorry. I'm sure I need that. Don't need that. Don't need that. Make sure I'll turn the game.
Live coding, I think there is a lot of truth to that. Same thing with a lot of moving to the cloud, I think, is that it was too difficult to get IT time and too much gatekeeping. Dummy hand.
Okay. And then return.
I don't know if it's just because I had a hand in creating it, but I really like create game with all categories assigned more than roll and assign for all categories. There's just something about that that speaks to me a little bit more. I think maybe because it's a little more immutable, a little more declarative.
Yeah, this one is because it's taking these parameters. It's like, here on these, do something.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas create game is saying, just give me one that's configured properly. And they are a very different feel. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
I would put that at the top, like line 56.
Right. Okay. Now I was just thinking of something else, so we can actually get rid of. We can just get rid of all this.
Oh yeah.
And then we just do fixture. Fixture.
What are you typing to get it to create the variable for you automatically?
Introduce variable. So Command Option V. But there's also, yeah. So basically, like here. So if I type this method,
Mm-hmm.
I can either type var, although that doesn't work because I have modal dialogues. So I can just do introduce variable.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's clever. I've never done that.
Yeah. Because it knows it's returning it, and therefore it knows what to do with it.
Ah, I thought it was some sort of auto completion thing, but no,
there is another one.
You're doing an expression and then making a variable out of it. That's very clever. I like that.
There is another one where it's NV, where it's I want to create a new game, and then it'll do that. But in our case, we actually want to do create fixture with game, and then there we want to assign it to the fixture.
Nice.
And we now so this is going to be that's what I was thinking about before.
No, it's just line 48, isn't it?
The thing is, this created it with all the categories already assigned. We need basically assign except for, and then assign that last one here.
What happens if you try to assign a category twice? Does it fail?
I don't know that I check for that.
Probably should fail fast. Like that would be illegal.
I would hope so, but I don't know that I actually do.
So we don't want to do that. So yeah, let's just modify this to be create game with all but one category assigned. And we'll pass in the category that we want it to not assign.
So store category and choose. So we'll go ahead and add that there. And I don't know what a better way to do this. I'm always worried about
do continue. I do a little guard clause that said continue. That probably would tick some people off, though. Yeah, I'm not. And I would put in a blank line to make it was clear that that was a guard clause.
I'm not crazy about that, but I'll leave it.
Yeah. I can understand that raising hackles, and if you want to do it with an if statement,
I don't think it's any worse. It might even be more clear. I'm always like, the fact that we have looping and if statements in test setup is a little.
Yeah, well, that's why I like having it in create game with like in a method. Like I would not do that in the test because you're right. I don't want to have. I want my test to read like a recipe. Do this, 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 this.
Yeah. So we got our fixture. So now we can say fixture.
You're going to need to have a dummy hand rolled after line 57.
Right, so that we can assign it.
Yes, Luigi, that the same thing crossed my mind. But since we were already using the for statement for the for loop, I do find myself wondering, like, mechanically, doesn't the filter and for each do multiple loops over the data? It always like bugs me just a little bit that I'm looping over the same data over and over and over again.
No, filter would basically not it would sort of absorb or consume the object before it
Is it using like a generator?
Thing.
It's like gonna go through all of them.
Well, so you'd have to convert the list to a stream, but then the stream is basically one by one, and if the filter doesn't let it pass along, then it basically doesn't call the next thing. So it's still only one loop through once it's converted to a stream.
Yeah, I think that's more sophisticated than the way JavaScript works. I'm pretty sure JavaScript, when you're doing a map or a filter or something like that, it's just looping because it's just an array, right? I could be wrong. It might be doing some fancy generator stuff under the covers.
I would assume if Java can do it, they can do it, but I have no idea. I have no insight.
They can do it, but Java's standard library is just way more sophisticated than JavaScript's. Sometimes to its detriment, but
all right. So we create game except for twos. We assign the category to twos. And we expect that was the last one.
Yeah, that should work.
Should. Yep. So I'm wondering.
Oh no! This is super clear.
So I was just want to see like what was and so IntelliJ does the right thing. So right, so
it's smart enough to see that.
It's smart enough to figure out that the continue is a filter.
Wow. I wonder if it would be smart enough to do that if you had an if statement instead of the continue.
I don't know. We could.
Let's find out.
So let's do that, and then invert it. Yep.
Oh, that's cool. Go ahead and do that refactoring. Yeah, that's not more clear.
Yeah, it's funny. Like in this case, it's just not.
And that's partly because of the noise of the arrays.stream, I think. But no, I think yeah, you're right. No, it's not really that.
It's yeah. It just is.
All right, let's undo this.
Yeah.
One more. I like the continue version best.
Yeah, I actually like the continue one better. Oops. Yep, that's good. Okay. The test pass. Let's just make sure. Yep. Okay. That's that one. This one's all good. This one's all good.
Okay, we could probably have time to do one more. Do we want to do that roll result model?
So we want one that basically, yeah. So we can actually. So we think we can take this out now, right? Because this is now redundant.
No, that. Oh yeah, we can. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because now that's handled, and then so we can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because now we handle that explicitly here.
I'm really liking these tests. They're feeling super clean to me. I don't love the state manipulation we have to do, but that's a whole nother thing.
All right, so now we want to test.
Yeah, so we are not checking the call to roll result anywhere. That was being checked as sort of a side effect of another test.
Yeah.
So roll result. How do we test that? Or is that tested by a WebMVC test?
It is not tested by a WebMVC test, mainly because it's really awkward to do so. You could, but since I don't have to, I would test it at this level. The question is what do we actually care about
So it's the current score, the categories. Yeah, so I think we set up a game with all the data in it, and then we check that the model has the various data that we set up. This should be a pretty clean test.
Yeah.
Can I get it started?
Yeah.
So roll result page populates model with game data. State. Game state, game data, game info. All right. Jim can't type. So yeah, we're going to want to do a game equals new game. And there'll be a lot of setup. And we'll make the game. Or we'll make the fixture, then we'll have a YachtController that okay, I gotta look at this again. So we're basically gonna do that. And then we should be able to assert. And probably what we're going to want to do, I don't know where you want to put it. Is there a way to do concurrent model.of or something like that?
No, it's basically, you got to instantiate and then just add attribute.
But then we'll just do an assert that model dot equals
is equal to
model. Am I getting that right?
Close.
All right, I'll let you fix it. Make it actually work.
Yeah, hopefully model has I would hope they have their implementations have an equals on it. Okay.
And I would probably put the expected model right next to the game creation, just because it's all sort of related setup. But I know people have a lot of different opinions on that.
I don't have a strong opinion either way. It's very much a feel. So let's see. So we want this. So score, we can just drive one, roll, add categories. So it's just going to go through all of the categories. And then
do we need to do that? Oh, that's the production code. So
yeah, I'm just thinking of what state we need to drive, and I don't think we need to drive very much.
No, I think one category, the current hand.
So I think we can do
because it's turning around and calling GameService. Like there's very little that can actually go wrong here.
Yeah.
So I don't need to check like yes, it can reroll and no, it can't reroll. Those are both basically doing the same thing under the covers. So.
So let's see. So let's go dice rolled. Wait, this is a hand of dice. Oops.
Hand of dice?
Yeah, I was just hitting the wrong keys there. And so that 2 4s. And I think that's it.
Do we want to roll another hand of dice just so we've got...
It's going to be the current hand. This will still be the current hand, but we can... we can roll it again.
No, that's good enough.
If we want to.
I think that's good enough. I want to keep the state manipulation to a minimum.
Yeah, so that I think is fine. Then we'll create the fixture.
I really like how this create fixture with game is working. Like that just, it's so nice.
So now we expect model, add attribute, expected model, and attribute. So we expect score to be whatever the game.score is.
Nice, yeah. A little bit of that collaborator-based isolation again.
Yeah. And role, we expect that to be role view list of that current hand.
Yeah.
And what is this? Categories.
We should be able to say game.categories, right? Oh, what is add categories to doing?
Yeah, so basically it's getting all the scored categories, and then for each one, it's pulling out just the score category, and then finding the averages for which
is using the
null.
Okay. Well, let's stop here because we're at the end of our time.
Yes.
Let's just put in a note to continue here. Continue with categories.
Yeah. Don't know I had that twice. Okay. All right.
Cool. So thoughts?
Yeah, this stuff is a lot cleaner. The fixture has been working out really nicely. And the create fixture with the game, once we propagated that through, that really tipped the balance.
Yeah, it was putting the game in inside of the game service.
Yeah,
that made that work. And I don't know why we didn't do that before. I think we were just so keen on getting rid of the delete me impl that we were just like, well, we're not going to touch it. But just a little bit of a tweak to make it work the way we wanted it to.
Yeah, because it was sitting there, but we just didn't use it. Yeah.
In fact, I think it's going to be really clean. Things for feeling good for me when doing that change helped, but also once we start getting the yacht tests, I think because the YachtController has just got a little bit more meat on its bones. VueController is like, we're spending all this time and effort testing something that's just a function call. Whine. But YachtController is actually, it's doing real work. It's doing stuff that needs to be tested.
Yeah.
It's got logic and if statements and stuff. So
it feels like these tests are sort of at the level of complexity that matches the complexity of the VueController, which is not much.
Right. Which is nice. I mean, that's a good sign.
Which is,
I want that.
Exactly. It's like it's not doing much, and so we shouldn't have to write much in the way of tests, whereas there was a lot more work before. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's partly the nature of VueController test being an API, because a well-designed API is just a thin wrapper.
Yeah.
It's 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and the domain model has been refactored and everything's different, but the API has to stay the same.
Right.
That's when it starts getting more interesting in terms of code.
Yeah. All right. Anything else we want to say?
No, I think this is good. So we'll continue on with this next week. I think we're getting close, but I've said that for like 5 weeks now. So
well, we're getting closer.
We're getting close to something. What are we getting close to? I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Then that's it, folks. Thanks again for hanging out with us. Appreciate all the comments as always. Love the interaction.
Oh, it's been great seeing so many people comment this time.
Yeah,
Thanks a lot, guys.
It's great. All right, and that's it. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
See y'all.
Bye.
See you later.